We have with us today Charles Adler, innovator, designer, entrepreneur, and the co-founder of Kickstarter.com. Charles, thanks for talking to us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
My first question to you would be, give me a little background about yourself. How did you get about creating Kickstarter?
So I guess I'll talk about me for a second. I guess I've always gravitated towards technical things, which is to say, as a kid, I wanted to be an architect, design and construction of buildings. That led me then to not architecture, but engineering, which would be the design and manufacturing of objects, right? Smaller architecture. And then while I was in engineering school, the internet became publicly available, and then the web on top of that as a layer, and that fascinated me, and I started tinkering on that, and then shortly after dropped out of school to go pursue that other technical challenge. Maybe in that story is kind of a little bit of my character, which is just this curiosity and this interest around creativity, the creation of things, whether that spanned from art to technology or consumer goods, but also related to that, technical things that are sort of mathematically challenging, so to speak. I find that interesting. Kickstarter started with my co-founder Perry. So there's three of us who started the company: Perry Chen, myself, Yancey Strickler, and Perry at the time was living in New Orleans, just a bit south of here, and wanted to put on a concert. Did all the work to put the concert together, but at the last minute was nervous that people wouldn't show up and that he would have to pay for the entire concert, right? So he was looking for a way to basically pre-sell tickets to the show. Nothing existed, the concert never happened, that bothered him. So he sat with that for a number of years, eventually moved back to New York where he's from, had been, again, thinking about this problem and had been working through maybe some version of a solution. Met Yancey, now had a partner to work through that solution. About a year later, plus or minus, met me, another partner. And what I would say is that in the construct of the three of us, we each come from different backgrounds. And it was those three backgrounds and maybe the commonality, the overlap, that I think was, for whatever reason, fairly powerful. It seemed to work.
Right. So what were some of the noticeable and most satisfying innovations to have come out from Kickstarter?
So I'll give you an example. I was traveling, I was in an airplane 30,000 feet above the earth, and watching a film, a little documentary on the airplane, and at the end, during the credits, you're trapped in an airplane, you're watching the credits, you also want to pay respect to those who contributed to the film, and there was a string of names with the thanks for our Kickstarter backers. And I was like, what is this, right? And so there was this moment, this kind of like weird emotional moment that I had where I actually didn't back the film because I'd never heard of it, sadly, because it was an amazing film called Innocente, which I recommend people watch. But I played some part in enabling that thing to happen. If we hadn't persevered in launching Kickstarter, that thing may not have happened in the way that it did. And so that, I don't know, that gave me a little bit of a buzz. You walk around and you see people wearing something or something in their home, like a work of art, or a shirt they're wearing, or pants, or a piece of hardware that they're wearing that is, because I can be obsessive, you recognize as like, that was a Kickstarter campaign. I remember that.
But you also have very successful innovations, like the Oculus.
Sure. Yep.
What does that do to you as a person and Kickstarter as a business?
Well, okay, so something like an Oculus, which raised like $2.5 million, like as a business that does very well, right? What I would also add is the other things, as Oculus is in AR and VR, all the other things that are in AR and VR as a sort of technology community, innovation community that get funded on Kickstarter, those are also valuable, right, to the company. But I think that it kind of goes back to the previous story, at least, and this is just for me and how I tend to see the world is, the dollars are interesting. That means it reached a lot of people. I think there's another validating point, which is $2.5 million, a couple thousand people that supported that campaign. That means that there was a pent-up desire for a VR headset, period, and that team created one that resonated with community, that arguably possibly didn't resonate with investors or companies that they worked at, or whatever the narrative might have been behind Oculus. And so I think that hero story, that story of perseverance, is the story that excites me.
So how much of what you do is emotional in nature, and how much of it do you look at business-wise, or look at maybe just solving some issues?
I think for any entrepreneur, it's always a deeply emotional thing. Emotional from the standpoint of solitary confinement. You're kind of alone, and the world is effectively stacked against you, right? You have some weird idea that nobody really comprehends right now. So you're isolated in that way. But I think that's one emotional side. The other emotional side that moves you forward, one pushes you back, the other pushes you forward, is seeing something out in the world that could have been better because of what you're working on. And so that is this gravitational pull forward, say, I need to get out there to help them, or the next version of them, or the other people that are like them, like me. And so I'd say there's another, that's the other emotional side. But I guess I look for what I would say is like a reinforcing duality, that the economics of the business reinforce the social impact that the business has. And you can't really have one without the other. Like, I'm not really interested necessarily in just purely business for the sake of business and dollars. That's awesome if that happens, but I think that's a little too myopic as well, because frankly, the stats on startups are pretty abysmal.
Right. So you left Kickstarter around 13, 14?
Yeah, 2013, 2014, yes.
So what is it that you're doing now?
I'm now working on a project called Lost Arts, but prior to that, I was in this sort of mode of what I would say is just discovery, observation, listening, to what were some of the other ailments that creative people had in pursuing their projects. So if you think about Kickstarter as a mechanism to attain funding through community, once you have an idea that you want to pursue, I was interested in kind of moving further down the stack, closer to the idea, in the sort of darker period, if you will, right? And in a way, actually, what I would say is Kickstarter enabled a creative person to shine a light on themselves for a minute, get them out of the dark, right? And that was inspiring to me, that worked. And so what I'm concerned with now is, again, this thing called Lost Arts. Started out as a solving the problem that creatives have, which is access to equipment. And that equipment could be sewing machine, table saw, like something to prototype. That equipment could be a manufacturing plant, factory, right? And so my first version of that was a makerspace in Chicago, right? So it literally gave them access to equipment, right, for a monthly fee, like a gym membership. That has now evolved into basically creating a network that connects creatives to one another in service of their project to find and discover the resources that they don't have right now. And that's very vague, but it's also very early for us. Like, we have not launched. There's no product per se just yet. We're in product development right now. So, yeah.